Hello everyone. Today's story is one of my absolute favourites. It's called The Littlest Watchman and it's by somebody called Scott James. It's also my daughter's favourite because she asked me to read it. So I hope you enjoy it, Bridget. Psalm 119, verse 148 says, "My eyes are awake before the watches of the night, that I may meditate on your promise." Have you ever had to wait for a special gift? Maybe right now there's a beautifully wrapped Christmas present waiting under your tree. That's if you've got your tree up, of course. We haven't got a house up yet, but we will do soon. The present is almost calling to you with the promise of something wonderful inside. Long ago, God's people found themselves waiting for something wonderful as well. They were waiting for something that had been promised to them. They were waiting and watching. One night, on a quiet hillside, a little boy sat beside an old tree stump, watching and waiting. His name was Benjamin, and he was a watchman. Exciting, isn't it? Never heard of a watchman before I read this book. Being a watchman was a pretty big job. Benjamin did his best to take it seriously, but the problem was that his main duty was to sit still and stare at a boring old tree stump, which made it kind of hard to stay interested. Even so, he knew that the people in his village counted on him. Benjamin's father was a watchman also, and he taught him all about it. "You want me to stare at a tree stump?" Benjamin had asked when he first learnt of the watch. "It's not about staring, son. It's about waiting," said his father. "Every day and every night, one of us is watching. We watch for the sign of the arrival of the king, just like our Maker promised." Benjamin's father had raised him to know the old stories of their people. He told them how long ago their Maker created the world and everything in it. All of it was very good, and the Maker had created people to love him and to care for his world. But something went terribly wrong. The people chose to follow their own plan. They disobeyed their Maker, and in doing so, allowed a curse to enter the land. The curse of sin. The curse brought pain and sorrow into their lives, and the lives of all their children. The world was still beautiful, but now, because of the curse, it was broken. Worst of all, the curse separated people from their Maker. Instead of living with him, they died. It all seemed rather hopeless, but things aren't always as they seem. Benjamin's father taught him that their Maker had promised to send someone to undo the curse. He promised to send them a king who would rescue them and restore the whole world, instead of leaving them like a useless stump. The Maker promised that a new branch, one man, would grow his people into a fruitful tree. This man would come from the family of a man named Jesse. The Maker told people to wait for his king and to trust in his promise. Sounds a wonderful promise, doesn't it? The watchmen did trust, and they did their best to help others trust too. They reminded people about what the Maker had said hundreds of years before. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. That's why they watch a tree stump. Even though the Maker had been awfully quiet for many years now, the watchman still trusted his promises and kept a close lookout for the arrival of the promised king. Benjamin wanted to be a good watchman, but he found it difficult. For one thing, it had become really boring. He tried to focus by tracing the rings of wood on the stump, circling his eyes round and round as he thought about the Maker's promise. But as hard as he tried, it took only a skittering bug or the hoot of an owl to make him completely lose track of where he was. Besides that, Benjamin struggled because everyone laughed at him. Sometimes other children from the village would throw things at him as he tried to stare at the stump. It was all very distracting. I think it would be. Must be quite a boring job, mustn't it? Then there were the shepherds. They often walked past him on their way to the fields. Most nights, Benjamin could hear them laughing and having a good time as they roamed the neighbouring hillside. Oh, they have all the fun, Benjamin often thought. They're not stuck looking at an old stump. I wish I could have been a shepherd instead of a watchman. Night after night, Benjamin kept watch, hoping that the long-awaited shoot would appear on the stump. But it never did. Nothing ever happened. One day, it became even harder for Benjamin to focus. The road below became very busy. Travellers started pouring past on the way to the village. There were people of all sorts, men and women, old and young, some on carts with donkeys, others walking. Benjamin even noticed a man helping a very pregnant woman slowly make her way along the road. Oh dear, lots of people all going into the town. Oh, that must have been a bit boring to sit up at the top and watch them, mustn't it? Along with all these distractions, something deeper started to trouble Benjamin. He had always believed the Maker would send the promised king, but he couldn't help but wonder what was taking so long. Maybe we've got the plan wrong, he began to think. Maybe he's not coming at all. The thought left him confused and a little ashamed. Benjamin had waited a long time, and he wasn't sure if he could do it any more. He took his eyes off the stump. Shoulders slumping, Benjamin looked towards the shepherd's hill. Maybe I should just go and become a shepherd, he thought. It seems I'm not cut out to be a watchman at all. But as he gazed towards the shepherds, Benjamin's eyes squinted and then widened. The shepherds were not alone. In the sky above them, a single light shone down. Suddenly, a glorious brightness lit up the night sky over the shepherds. Shading his eyes, Benjamin could see a host of dotted lights within the larger glow. He couldn't make out the words, but he could hear that the lights were singing, joyously singing. Benjamin sat spellbound as he took in the light and the melody. It was so beautiful. He never wanted it to end. And yet, something drew his attention back to the old stump. Benjamin's eyes had been trained to know every detail of the stump. It never changed. It had always been the same. But it wasn't now. Growing out of the hardened wood on the top of the stump was a small green shoot. A great flood of joy filled Benjamin as he remembered the Maker's promise. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. Quick as he could, Benjamin jumped up and he ran towards the village, down into Bethlehem, barely able to contain his excitement as he darted along the dark path. As he reached the edge of the sleeping houses, the words burst out of his mouth in a great shout. "He's here! He's here! The king has come!" Wow, how exciting! Just then, the door of a small building swung open, and light from inside spilled out into the street. And Benjamin heard a familiar voice, the voice of one of the shepherds. Yes, the king has come. Would you like to come in and meet him? Wow, isn't that an amazing story? It must have been a very boring job, sitting watching a tree stump, because they don't do an awful lot, do they? But then, to see the shepherds and angels with them, because that's what the bright light was, and the angels were singing, and everybody was so happy and excited, so Benjamin had to run through the town and tell everybody that the king had come. Oh, that must have been such an amazing time. And we're going to have the same in a few weeks' time, because we're going to celebrate Jesus arriving again, because that's who the king is. The king is Jesus. I hope you enjoyed that. I think Steve's got another quiz for you now. Have fun, and I'll see you next week. Bye.
Hi, boys and girls. Another amazing story there by Mandy, wasn't it? Wonder where she's found all these different stories about Christmas. I won't be surprised if there's another one next week. Anyway, this week's game or quiz is also about Christmas. I got some letters here on a piece of card, and I wanted to try and think of anything we can that's to do with Christmas. Doesn't matter whether it's like in the Bible or modern Christmas or anything to do with Christmas that begins with that letter. Here's my first letter, and it's the letter G. G. Can you think of anything to do with Christmas that begins with the letter G? I'm going to give you a little while to have a think, maybe ask mum and dad, brother and sister, have a quick look around, think of anything that might be to do with Christmas, and let me see if you can guess some of the things that I've thought of. I wonder if you thought of anything I didn't think of. These are the things I thought of. First of all, there's G for gold. That was one of the gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus at baby Jesus at Christmas. Do you remember? And talking of gifts, that's another G, isn't it? G for gifts. The gifts that the wise men brought, and the gifts that we sometimes receive at Christmas, and the gifts that we give to other people at Christmas. And some people, for Christmas, for their big Christmas dinner, they eat a roast goose. Wonder if you've ever had goose for Christmas. I haven't. I have tasted goose, but I've never had a whole goose for Christmas dinner. I don't think one person will be able to eat a whole one anyway. G is also for Games. Do you play games at Christmas time? I love to play games any time, but particularly at Christmas when the family's there. G is for games. And what about this one? Grotto. Do you know that little Santa's cavern or cave or shed or something sometimes you see in the big shops or in the garden centres where you can go and see Santa, and you pay a little bit of money, he gives you a present and he asks you what you want for Christmas. They're all things to do with Christmas, and they begin with G. What about this next letter? This is the letter P. 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 What can you think of that's to do with Christmas that begins with the letter P? I'll give you a moment or two while I sup my coffee. Oh, that's tasty. Okay. Well, these are the things I thought of. See if any of them you thought of as well. First of all, there were parcels. The delivery man comes with lots of parcels, usually in brown paper or boxes, that usually contain Christmas presents inside, perhaps for ourselves or for other people. Parcels are very busy at Christmas time. And then there's P for paper chains. Do you have paper chains hanging in your house during Christmas time? I know we used to make our own when I was a boy, and we used to hang them up from the ceiling. And of course, there's another word for gifts, which is presents. We love presents, don't we? Oh, yes. Those of you that are connoisseurs and chefs and love the food that we eat at Christmas will be thinking of pigs in blankets. That's a very funny name to call something to eat. It's just tiny, short cocktail sausages wrapped up in bacon. Pigs in blankets. And also there is pudding. Christmas pudding. I like Christmas pudding. In the old days, they used to put a coin inside, and whoever ended up with it was able to keep it. You had to be careful you didn't swallow it, of course. That was one of the dangers. So that's P. Did you get any of those? This next one, there's loads beginning with this letter. Here it is. It's the letter S. Okay, what begins with the letter S and is to do with Christmas? Have a think about it, and we'll come back to it just after I've had another sip of coffee. How you doing? Have you got a big long list? I have. Got a very long list for this one. Are you ready then? First of all, at Christmas we think of snow. I can only remember 2 or 3 times in my entire life when we've actually had snow around Christmas time. But we do see it, don't we? In all of the films, it always seems to be snowing on Christmas Day. And on the Christmas cards and calendars and pictures and things. So snow is to do with it. And of course, we will think of the chap with the red suit and the beard, Santa. He is to do with our modern Christmas. And then there's S for stocking that we hang up and that gets filled with gifts or presents. Maybe some of you have a pillowcase these days because your presents are so big or there are so many of them. And then there's S for sleigh, Santa's sleigh that he carries with his supposed reindeer. And then for those of us that really do have snow and are able to get out in it, we might get out the sledge so that we can go zooming around on top of the snow. And then if we think of the Bible story concerning Christmas, we think of the shepherds who came to see Jesus. And we also think of the sheep that they were looking after on the hillside. Those of you that are very hungry might think of Christmas Day and maybe some of the days leading up to it when we eat sausage rolls, for sausage rolls. Those of you that go outdoors and like to go for a walk or play outside even though it's very cold probably will wear a scarf, for scarf. And then we think of the Bible story of Christmas again, and we think of the stable where we believe Jesus was born. And another S is the star that the wise men saw and followed. so that they could find baby Jesus. Oh, there was a lot for that letter, wasn't there? How many of those did you get, I wonder? Not so many for this next one. This is the letter M. M. I just thought of 2 or 3. Well, actually 4 or 5, or maybe 5 or 6. Really? Okay. The first one. Well, I've got to give you time to have a think, so I'll have a quick swig of coffee first. That's it. M is for mistletoe. Do you know those white berries that sometimes they hang from the ceiling? Because the story goes that if a man or a boy catches a girl underneath the mistletoe, he's allowed to kiss her. Oh, maybe you got some mistletoe in your house. If so, you might want to try it. Okay. And then there was one of the gifts that the wise men brought, beginning with a M. Can you remember it? Myrrh. Yeah. And then there was those things that we love to eat before Christmas and during Christmas. They're called mince pies. Mince pies. Another name, a modern name that we give for the wise men who visited Jesus begins with a M, and it's the Magi. That's a hard one. You probably didn't get that. M is for Magi. Try and remember that, because that's another name for the wise men. And who was Jesus's mum? We all know that one, don't we? Because her name begins with M, with M. It's Mary. And where was Jesus found by the shepherds? I know he was in the stable, but what was he lying in? He was lying in a manger, wasn't he? And then another drink that sometimes people like to drink at Christmas time begins with a M, and that's mulled wine. It's like warm, heated up wine, okay? Mulled wine. So that's the letter M. I've got a couple more letters here, not so many for things after this letter. This is the letter K, curly K, C. What begins with K? Actually, there's a fair few of these. Have a quick think, and I'll have another swig of coffee. Have you thought yet? Well, at tea time on Christmas Day, we might eat a Christmas cake. That begins with K. We might get, as one of our gifts, something to hang up on the wall so we can tell what day and date it is. Yes, a calendar. We usually get calendars given to us at Christmas. Lots of people do. I do. And before Christmas, you might get in the post and sometimes handed to you a card, a Christmas card. And what's those special songs that we sing at Christmas time? Can you remember? Yes, we call them carols. That begins with a K, and of course, where there are carols, there are usually carol singers. They're the people that sing it. Could be you, could be me. And then around Christmas lunchtime, when we have our Christmas dinner, and just before perhaps we start to eat, we grab one of these from the table and we pull it with somebody else. It's a Christmas cracker. A cracker. Yes, that's right. And sometimes we see in the decorations at the church or at home, sometimes we just set fire to them. We have special candles. Do you remember? And talking of church, that's another one. People tend to go to church, to special carol services or services on Christmas Day itself. And the last one is a hard one, and we might not even think it begins with a K because it doesn't sound like it. It's census. That's where people have to go in order to be counted. And that's why Joseph and Mary had to go to Bethlehem to be counted. A census was going on. Here's my last letter. There's not many for this one. You're probably getting a bit weary with this now. This is the letter T. T. What can you think of to do with Christmas that begins with a T? I could only think of 3. Maybe you can think of more. I hope you can, because you are very clever. The first one, shall I tell you, is turkey. We love to eat turkey at Christmas. And the second one is that shiny stuff that sometimes we put in our decorations around the house. It's tinsel. And the other one is the one that we might have a real one, or we might have a pretend one, and we put lots of lights and decorations on it. It's the tree. How did you do? How many did you get? We'll have another look at Christmas next week. But in between now and then, it's Steve saying bye.